Welcome back. Now in this session, I am going to walk you through the concept of arrow function. In this aspect, we look how to write an arrow function, get to know about lexical scope, and at last we will discuss about some practical use case of arrow function. So let's get started by creating a folder called 06 arrow functions, and within that let's 01 arrow functions demo.js file. Now let's start writing code. Here in the first part of the code defines a function named add using a traditional function expression. This function takes two parameters, a and b, and returns their sum. The syntax for this function is straightforward, using the function keyword followed by the parameters in parentheses and the function body enclosed in curly braces. Next, I am going to write code that provides an equivalent implementation using an arrow function, which is a more concise way to write functions introduced in ES6, JavaScript 2015. The arrow function addArrow also takes two parameters, a and b, but the syntax is more compact. The parameters are followed by the arrow equals, and the expression a plus b directly follows the arrow, implicitly returning the result without needing the return keyword or curly braces. Finally, the code includes two console.log statements to demonstrate that both functions work correctly and produce the same output. The console.log add 1, 2, and console.log addArrow 1, 2 lines both output 3, confirming that the traditional function and the arrow function are functionally equivalent. Now we are done with understanding how to write arrow function. Next we will look into lexical scope. Lexical scope, also known as static scope, is a fundamental concept in JavaScript and many other programming languages that determines how variable names are resolved in nested functions. It means that the scope of a variable is defined by its position within the source code, and nested functions have access to variables declared in their outer scope. Let's understand lexical scope through an example. So I am going to create a file called 02lexicalscope.js. Now let's write code. I am going to write code to demonstrate the concept of lexical scope in JavaScript, which determines the accessibility of variables based on their location within nested functions. The outer function is defined first, and within its scope, a constant variable outer variable is declared and assigned the string value IAM from the outer function. This variable is local to outer function and cannot be accessed outside of it. Inside outer function, another function named inner function is defined. Within inner function, a constant variable inner variable is declared and assigned the string value IAM from the inner function. This variable is local to inner function and cannot be accessed outside of it. Let's run it. The inner function contains two console.log statements. The first console.log outputs the value of outer variable, demonstrating that inner function can access variables declared in its outer scope, outer function. This is an example of lexical scoping, where inner functions have access to variables declared in their outer functions. The second console.log outputs the value of inner variable, showing that inner function can access its own local variables. After defining inner function, it is called within outer function, which executes the code inside inner function and prints the values of outer variable and inner variable to the console. Now if we remove this commented line and try to access the inner variable from outside, then it throws the error inner variable is not defined. So that means inner variable is not accessible from outside. This is about lexical scope in regular function. Now let's look into lexical scope in arrow function. So to understand that, let's create another file called 03lexicalscope in arrow function.js. Now let's write the code. Outer function is defined as an arrow function. Inside outer function, a constant variable outer variable is declared. Inner function is also defined as an arrow function inside outer function. Inside inner function, a constant variable inner variable is declared. Inner function can access outer variable because of lexical scope. Inner function can also access its own variable inner variable. Outer function calls inner function, which logs both outer variable and inner variable. Let's run it. And you will notice that it gives the same output. Now let's uncomment this line of code and rerun it, then you will find that it will throw the error, inner variable is not defined. So in conclusion, lexical scope works the same way with arrow functions as it does with traditional functions. Inner functions, whether arrow functions or not, can access variables from their outer scope, but outer functions cannot access variables from their inner scope. So guys, this is what I wanted to demonstrate you in this session. In the next session, we will look into classes in ES6. On this note, I am stopping over here. See you in the next session.